Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Wattsburg Area School District, where we are student-centered and future-focused for a world-class education. The board work session of January 8th, 2024 is now called to order. Would you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Brummenden.
Here.
Mrs. Burlingham.
Here.
Mrs. Hetherington.
Here.
Mrs. Lee.
Here.
Mr. Morvay.
Here.
Dr. Pushcheck.
Here.
Mr. Williams.
Here.
Mr. Young.
Here.
Mr. Blazer.
Present. Thank you. Please note the board met in executive session prior to this evening's meeting to discuss a personnel issue. The chair recognizes Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Ken Berlin, for school reports. Will we have school reports next week?
Yes, next week, the middle school principal is going to present a student that made an outstanding academic achievement. We're going to recognize them, so hopefully they'll be here to join us.
Awesome, thank you. The next item on the agenda is guest and citizens' comments. No one has signed up to speak to the board this evening. The chair recognizes Dr. Ken Berlin for superintendent's report.
I will have a brief report next week to the board on some upcoming items, including a little preview of what the governor's proposed budget might look like in February. We're starting to hear some things there. And also we had some communication about an updated report on how we're doing academically in the district. Mrs. Kelly has been working with the principals on that, and we would like to schedule a curriculum committee meeting in February so that we have enough time to go over that in detail and include the benchmark at cadence testing, some of the PSSA information. There was a lot of things that were mentioned, so we want to give you the best overview we can. Next week, as you know, is pretty busy because we're going to look at the local audit, which happens every year, and that'll be a finance committee before the regular meeting. And there's a lot of information there to unpack, especially if you haven't looked at financial statements like that before, so we wanted to allow enough time. So February, we'll shoot for an academic presentation. Plus, we'll have updated benchmarks at that time, too. Because that's something that's Mrs. Kelly's been working with the staff on over the past few years. We've really overhauled how we assess students throughout the year, so we know where they're at and we can move them forward. So we'll have a little more data to share in a presentation in that format at that time.
Thank you. Is there any questions from the board for Dr. Berlin? Hearing none, the chair recognizes Ms. Vicki Bendig for her financial report.
Thank you, Mr. President. For this evening, I have the treasurer's reports. For the general fund, cash in the account as of December 31st, 2023, $14,404,431.49. Capital projects has a total of $379,682.39 in that account as of the end of December. And the cafeteria, as of December 31st, had a balance of $747,102.72. I also have bill lists. Exhibit A1 are checks already written. These are checks that would have been written between the December 4th reorganization and regular board meeting and this evening. Those total $265,710.08. Cafeteria checks that were written between December and now total $44,197.80. And the Seneca High School Activity Fund currently has $68,514.26 total in those accounts. I will have the budget versus actual profit and loss information and the rest of the reports next week.
Thank you. Is there any questions from the board for Ms. Bendick regarding the reports? Hearing none, those items will be on our agenda next week for your consideration. Thank you, Ms. Bendick. There's one item on the agenda under legal advisement for next week, LA1, which is for the exoneration of delinquent property taxes as listed below. Is there any questions or discussions on LA1? Hearing none, that item will be on our agenda for consideration next week. The chair recognizes Dr. Andy Pushak for finance.
Thank you, Mr. President. There are 3 items under finance for next week's board meeting. F1 is the monthly budget transfers, F2 is the updated IRS mileage rate, and F3 is the local audit report. And I would just like to remind the public that next week, prior to our board meeting at 6 p.m., we will have a Finance Committee meeting to discuss this local audit report, and then the board will be requested to take action on that. So 3 items for next week, Mr. President.
Thank you. Is there any question or discussion on the 3 items under finance? Hearing none, those items will be on our agenda next week for consideration. Thank you, Dr. Pushak.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The chair recognizes Mr. Brian Young for buildings and grounds.
Mr. President, there's one item, B1. It's assignment letter, agreement between the school district and Mid-American Natural Resources outlined as notice of assignment.
Thank you. Is there any questions or discussions on the item under building and grounds? Hearing none, that item will be on our agenda next week for your consideration. Thank you, Mr. Young.
Thank you, Mr. President.
The chair recognizes Ms. Nicole Lee for personnel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Next week, I'll have 6 items for consideration. They include P1, substitute additions as listed, P2, tuition reimbursements as listed, P3, resignations as listed, P4, appointments, P5, conference requests, and P6, leave requests.
Thank you. Are there any questions or discussions on the 6 items under personnel? Hearing none, those items will be on our agenda next week for your consideration. Thank you, Mrs. Lee.
Thank you.
The chair recognizes Ms. Brittany Burlingham for policy.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will have no items underneath policy at this time.
Thank you, Mrs. Burlingham. The chair recognizes Mr. Steve Morvay for curriculum.
Thank you, Mr. President. Currently, there are no items under curriculum as well.
Thank you, Mr. Morvay. The chair recognizes Mr. Jesse Williams for technology.
Nothing at this time, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. The chair recognizes Mr. Greg Brummagen for transportation.
Mr. President, there's one item to approve the transportation request and ratification of field trips since last meeting as outlined.
Thank you. Is there any question or discussion on T1? Hearing none, that item will be on our agenda next week for consideration. Thank you, Mr. Brummagen. The chair recognizes Ms. Leah Hetherington for athletic and extracurricular.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will have 3 items under extracurricular and athletic activities. AE1, volunteer list as listed, AE2, extracurricular appointments as listed, and AE3, athletics co-op agreement as listed.
Thank you. Is there any question or discussion on the 3 items under athletic extracurricular? Hearing none, those items will be, Mrs. Hetherington.
The swimming co-op agreement that we have with Northeast, if we were to, my understanding, the transportation's not provided. If we had enough interest in it, would that be something that we could provide?
I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, no, it's a good question. We'll have an answer for you.
Okay.
I would think if we had a lot of students, we could probably look at that. Typically, it's been one.
Well, I think if you had transportation, you'd have more students. Have to follow each other.
Oh, I see what you're saying, right.
If we have enough students, we can use our own pool.
The swamp in the back,
So,
That alternate was not chosen.
the practice field in the front.
yeah, let me look into that a little bit. That's a good question. I was a competitive swimmer, so I'm all for promoting the sport.
Hearing no other questions, those items will be on our agenda next week for your consideration. Thank you, Mrs. Hetherington. There is one item under miscellaneous for next week, and one, the surplus items listed below. Are there any questions or discussions on those items, on our surplus items? Hearing none, those items will be on our agenda next week for consideration. Mr. Morvay, will we have an Erie County Technical School report next week?
Yes, Mr. President, we had our December board meeting on the 19th of December, so I will have a report on the proceedings there.
Thank you. And for the Northwest Tri-County Intermediate Unit, Dr. Pushak, will we have a report next week?
Same, Mr. President, yes, I'll report on our December meeting briefly.
Great, thank you. That brings us to board correspondence and dialogue. Anything from the board this evening?
I have a couple of things I'd like to go over.
Mr. Bremner?
I too would agree that if you remove obstacles and hurdles, you might get more student involvement in a lot of things. So I'm definitely on board with the train of thought on that one. Do we offer paper agendas? At the last meeting, it was said that we're a paperless meeting. That wasn't mentioned today, but I see the PowerPoint up there. Do we offer paper agendas to the public?
I think back there.
I see they're back, but
Yeah, they're on the-
what was the paperless meeting comment at the last one?
At our reorganization meeting?
Yes.
I don't remember that comment. Did I say it? I don't think I
At
said
the
it.
very beginning of the meeting, I believe it was Mr. Berlin, Dr. Berlin that mentioned that we were a paperless meeting, so I was curious on that. I sent an email requesting some thought be put into a disclaimer of some sort for public comment. And here's a meeting that nobody signed up for public comment, but we don't have any type of information to hand them of what they're allowed to say and what they didn't say. I really felt that the last meeting was, lack of a better word, rude. It was my first meeting that I have attended, and that fell on deaf ears. So are we not willing to educate what people can say and what they cannot say to the board, or are we willing to put some time and effort to that? Because somebody could have came today, and we could have been in the exact same situation. We're not, but is that something we're going to put time and effort into, or no?
There has been time and effort put into it. I understand and completely can see it from your perspective that that was not communicated back through email. Me and Mr. Berlin have discussed it. I came up with some clarification of our rules of order for public comments that I did prepare if we had a public commenter and needed to be presented, they would be ready to present. We also have a, what is it called? Give me one moment. Our school board meeting guide, which is available online, but is also in the back when people sign up. That also details out all the sort of rules of engagement for school board meetings, including the public comments. So all those things happened between our last meeting and this meeting, but from your perspective, I can completely see why you could get the viewpoint that nothing had happened, so.
Well,
Mr. President?
This board meeting guidance, Pat, I started
It's
that
not new.
10 years ago. It's always back
And we've
there.
updated that periodically.
Yeah.
So if people go to the back table, they know what they can say and how to approach the board.
Awesome, I'll go back there before or when we conclude.
No, good question.
And as far as the agenda goes, again, new, where are the exhibits? How do I find them? Like, you went through everything really, really quick.
Sure.
First time I saw the agenda, to sit down and really review anything, to even know if I have thoughts or comments on it. Today's one of the first days I've noticed that I'm transportation now, right? And I got to talk on something. So is this all dog and pony show, or is there stuff
Did you get the
behind
weekly
this?
update?
I get weekly updates, sure.
Did you see that you were the transportation
And-
chair in the weekly update? Did you see to review the agenda and click on every single hyperlink to the website to prepare?
So they're
for the
also,
meetings?
all that stuff
All that
is
stuff.
online, and we can bring it here to us. It's not,
It's available to the public.
okay,
Sure.
awesome.
It's
Yeah.
on the, if you go on the school website.
Yep, I'm on there quite
or
often.
The Board of Education
Mhm.
link at the top.
I'm logged in and I'm-
The agenda is on that page. You can
Yeah.
click on it.
I'm on there quite often.
And are you, you
So
do-
we talk about the committee meetings and stuff, and that we're all committees. And so,
Maze as a whole?
correct, that we're all a committee as a whole.
Correct.
And we just roll through the stuff that quick, 2 seconds.
Yes. I'm hearing your maybe question of that, so I guess.
Just seems really,
As an example, so the transportation request, so what I do, just to give you, this is just how I do it.
Yep.
Not saying it's the only way to do it, but before the board meetings, when we get the agenda, I go through and I'll click on the hyperlink, and my paper's blue, so that's why I'm pointing to it, but the hyperlink, and I'll see what are our transportation requests, and I can review them. And I'll just say that after being on the board for a few years, that they're pretty standard. I mean, there's nothing really that jumps out at me, but, as Ms. Hetherington asking about the swimming, there's things that happen in the meeting that I think of and are good questions, but for the most part, if I have something I want to ask about before the meeting, it's because I've looked at it and then I came to the meeting with I want to hear how they explain that, if they explain it, or I'll ask for more detail. on that. But as far as like approving transportation requests, today, all we're doing is approving to put it on the agenda for next week. And next week, we can go into more detail. Typically, this is the meeting, though, where if we were going to go into more detail on a topic, we would discuss it more thoroughly. And so next week, just because of other reports, this part of the meeting can kind of go more formally and quickly. So I don't know if that satisfies or even answers what you're asking, but.
Just trying to figure out the rules of the road here, because it seemed real.
So if I may
Sure, go
add,
ahead.
also, this is the work session. So this is the time where the agenda is presented, you add your items to the agenda, and it is expected that you would have looked at any exhibit that is for your committee to make sure that you fully understand it. And if you see it on Friday or Saturday and you don't fully understand it, that you would reach out to Dr. Berlin or myself or Mrs. Kelly or an administrator that is, like, I would be anything for finance or possibly legal stuff or transportation, right? So if you have questions about those, you can ask me. I would get an answer to you so that you are prepared to present information that you've gleaned. Here's our transportation requests. I see that the ROTC is going to wherever they're going, and it's all set up in there. So if you think someone else may have the same question that you have, you would be informed to be able to share that because that's your committee. So this is the time to discuss it, and then next meeting is the formal, okay, we've already discussed it, we all know where we stand on it, then we can vote about it.
So if this is the committee of one meeting,
This is the committee of the whole.
correct, right? That's what, saying the same thing differently.
Sure.
We just went through everything and nothing happened.
Correct.
Because everyone looked at the exhibits ahead of time and didn't have questions about
Nobody had
it.
any questions, okay.
So if you have questions, it would be the time to talk about it.
In our work sessions, you can look for minutes, they've gone fairly quickly, not because I'm trying to go fast.
I'm not trying to
Have anywhere
delay,
else to
trust
be,
me.
right? But at the same time, I think that, a lot of this becomes just sort of form and process. So personnel, Mrs. Lee, God bless her, has the most to say, typically just because there's the most things in personnel, but, we're looking at extracurricular appointments just because that's up on the screen. We're not questioning individuals on there, we're just approving the entire slate of candidates that the administration has already said they want to be approved. So, yes, it does go fast, but I guess I don't know what else we would.
Well, there's been
into.
times in other topics.
Sure.
When it comes budget time,
Yes.
or when it becomes a
Curriculum.
curriculum time or discussion, that those discussions have happened during the work session. People have brought up questions, I've asked questions of certain line items in the budget or expenses or whatever else. Those things then get explained. Similarly, there's been, I remember there was some athletic appointments or athletic issues that was brought up about, building use and other things. Those were brought up at that time. So just given this current slate of items seem to be fairly straightforward.
Thank you.
So, but this is the opportunity to absolutely bring up any issues that anybody has with the information that is presented prior to this meeting. So, and then by next meeting, the agenda has the opportunity to change, correct? I don't want to step my foot. Additions, right? And then there's
Yeah, there's usually an addendum.
Addendum.
And I
There'll be
just
an addendum that'll come out.
kind of addressing the whole board,
Yeah, please do.
for those that are new to the process, a lot of typically personnel issues happen in the week between the regular board meeting. So, for example, we're probably going to have a recommendation for our third IT position for the board Monday, because they just finished the screening interview process, which was pretty lengthy today. But the board agenda by law has to be posted at least 24 hours before the meeting. So we couldn't just add that for board discussion tonight. But a lot of those things, if the timing works out right, I'll put it in the weekly update so you know it's coming. And that's what I would do this week, this Thursday. I would say, hey, it wasn't on the agenda, but we're recommending the board consider hiring this person that we just finished the interview
Another
process
example
with.
might be a facility use request
Facility use, yeah.
that
it's-
doesn't come in until now, or until tomorrow, but it's going to happen in February, and if we wait till the February board meeting, it's going to be too late, so we might put
Yeah,
it on
so
the addendum to move it.
We're always trying to stay out ahead, and sometimes that addendum is a tool for some of that business that comes up in between. We are prohibited by law, though, from adding substantial stuff at an actual voting session, unless it falls into an emergency, flooding, fire. There's a few exceptions, but if it has any type of significant impact, we just can't add it on the spot right there. It needs to be available to the public 24 hours in advance. The board, so I put the weekly update out on Thursday most of the time, unless I get pulled into something. But my secretary, Mrs. Newfer, will post to that intranet site, the board members only access site. She'll put the agenda up there with whatever hot exhibit links she has at the time. And then usually Friday, the last thing she does before the end of the day is post the public agenda. There's been times where we've had to update it on a Saturday, still within that 24-hour time period. Not very often, usually something pretty urgent. So that's a little bit about the flow, when you can access. And regarding questions at the work session, if you look the things over before we get here, on a Thursday evening or Friday or a Monday morning, if you have a question that's going to need some data or research, give Vicki or Becca or I, give us a call so we could do a little bit of legwork, because it might require us to present some information to the whole board for discussion, if indeed there's something, a path the board wants to take as part of that question. If we don't have a little advance notice, then, we don't have the luxury of using everyone's time wisely. So it doesn't always work that way, I know. And Leah, I'm not going to hold the sports swimming thing again. I mean, I'm not talking about something like that, but if it's something that takes a research that we could really discuss and could be a big agenda item, give us a heads up if we can gather some information. That's the best case.
Mr. President, just to reiterate Mrs. Bendig's point, it's our job as board members to prepare before the meeting, to keep up with the weekly updates, to review the agenda before we get here, to have questions ready or send them in ahead of time so the administration can bring them to us. The meetings, the work session is the time to discuss. The regular board meeting is the time to conduct the business of the district. It's not the time to discuss. That's what this meeting is for. That's why they call it a business meeting. It's a voting meeting. This is not a voting meeting, where this is more of a discussion meeting. So just keep that in mind, that the administration is very willing to help us with any questions we might have prior to the meeting. It's more helpful if we can ask them before the meeting, so they can, as Dr. Berlin said, bring the information to us. But a lot of these are very routine, and you'll see that on a monthly basis. You'll see the same types of resolutions month after month after month.
Mr. Williams, just one sec. I was going to share, just as an example, when I looked at the agenda earlier today, I think is when I did it, I saw that I had to read about legal advisements, and I have a little script, so I make sure I stay on track, and I was looking because normally I'm saying there are no legal advices. Most of the time there isn't. But I saw, there is one this month, so I got to make sure I talk about that. And then I saw, we were discussing the exoneration of delinquent property taxes, putting myself in other people's shoes. Sometimes people may say, why are we giving up on getting property taxes? We need all the revenue we can get. So I clicked on the link, and I went and looked at that particular property. Now, I do this for a living, so I know a lot about properties. This is something that I can say I felt very comfortable we were giving up on, because it's a trailer that wasn't paying their taxes anyways. We weren't going to get it. The land bank's taking this property to hopefully recycle it and get it on the tax rolls. So I just kind of dug into that enough so that if anybody had any questions, I wasn't just reading it and didn't really know what I was talking about. Now, I expect Vicki to have all that information in her head too and be able to explain it well, but I guess I just want to feel confident about what I'm talking about. I don't know anything about the surplus items, the Canon camcorders. I have no idea if those are really great products that we're getting rid of or not. Mr. Williams?
Yeah, so, sorry, I felt like I had to raise my hand,
no,
right?
you're fine. I saw you hit the red light.
Yeah, okay, is that how we similar? All right. Dr. Berlin, I heard you say to Mr. Merve that you have something for curriculum next week, right, under that particular committee. So I'm assuming that
Right.
as I look at this, and if there's nothing under me, under Jesse Williams, under tech, that the assumption is I don't really have anything unless something fulfills that role. I'm not meeting with somebody on a regular basis or anything to that extent. It's just, hey, here's something, here's under the agenda, this is what I'm reading, and then if I have further questions underneath that tech aspect. But I could, and then in theory, reach out to you about technology of some sort,
Absolutely.
and then fill something under that particular agenda item. Am I correct on what I'm saying?
You will not ever have to worry about anything under.
Right, which I
Coming
somewhat,
from
Yeah,
experience,
so,
Yeah.
you
yeah,
will probably
I mean,
only maybe
essentially, that's, that's how our board policy is set up.
Yeah.
The agenda is put together by the superintendent. I'm charged with that in consultation with the board president.
Gotcha.
So if you see something in technology, you have questions, give us a call, we can talk about it. But you're welcome as you look through the agenda, if you have other things that you have questions on, under any item, when the president asks, is there any discussion, that's always precedes a vote. That's a time for any board member that might have a question on any item.
Now, as they mentioned before too, a lot of us that have nothing under our agenda item today, we could come in next week with an addendum with something potentially added if something occurs between now and our regular board meeting.
And that
So-
addendum is posted 24 hours prior to the meeting.
I can see where our meetings at first blush might seem sterile or perfunctory or like we don't care, or we strive to have an educated board. That's one of the things that I work at, is to make sure you have the information you need to make a good decision before the question is called. And the board president, we've established a tradition here of running meetings by Robert's Rules of Order, which is very efficient. I mean, that was the goal. That's why those were created. I've been at lots of different public meetings and watched different meetings, and I've seen organizations that don't follow Robert's Rules of Order, and they don't get nearly accomplished what we do. Because we're all about making sure that we're working together, we're informed together, the board is supporting what we're trying to do and move the school forward. And with the board support, which has been incredible over the past, during my tenure here, is more than I could ask for. We have really made a lot of strides that otherwise wouldn't have been possible without the organization and the appreciation for the discipline and the tact and professionalism with how we approach our roles. And we expect it because you get paid a lot of money, too. Just kidding there. But, so, that's kind of my thoughts on, I understand perception might be, this is quite they can be antiseptic, boring meetings, but doesn't mean that they're not productive or we're not informed.
Just one more comment on the board as a whole, the committee as a whole. So as an example, and it seems like it happens in certain categories more often than others. So something like curriculum or something like even athletics, extracurricular, it isn't uncommon that the board committee chair would say, could we add a committee meeting in the upcoming months and dig into, what our extracurricular activities are like, we've asked for reports from the athletic director in the past on how our athletic performances and number of students in different activities are, curriculum, similarly, we've had extra meetings, so, and that's how it works, so while Ms. Hetherington would be the one to maybe call for the meeting in athletic curricular, if you had questions and, wanted to bring that to her attention, she would go through the board president and the superintendent to schedule it, but all of us can ask for that at any time through whoever is the chair of that committee.
Well, and that committee at the whole allows for all board members to participate in any given category.
Right.
So I appreciate that transparency and appreciate that allows all of us versus a group of two or a group of three that may have one individual heading, then that is presented to the board, because there may be other things that didn't pop up in those mini committees, because we've been on other boards, or we've seen other boards that have a facilities committee or a finance committee, or whatever those case may be, and then they bring to the board at large. I think I prefer the committee as a whole format that allows us all to participate.
And I was going to say, though, I will say, I do appreciate Mr. Bremingen and Mr. Williams even asking, though, because I know there's essential trainings with this, but some of that doesn't happen until after your first couple meetings. So I myself had very similar questions, but at the time I knew like Mrs. Farrell, Mrs. Lee, and I was able to reach out and be like, okay, so how is this going to run? So I do understand, because and maybe that's something we might need to look at for the future when new board members come on, because we don't really actually get too prepared before your first meeting. It happens later, I feel like, but so I can understand where the confusion will come, where, well, how is the structure of this happening? What are my expectations? Because sometimes we're not fully ready before our first meeting occurs. So,
Agree?
Yeah, each board's just a little bit different,
Sure.
depending on which one you, even
Like
school
school
board,
board.
some have standardized meetings, we meet every boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
Regardless if there's something on the agenda. That's why, Dr. P, when you brought up like meeting next week at 6, right? So that's what I was assuming, there might be, but there isn't, so I understand that now.
And we'll have an annual finance committee meeting. I don't call that meeting, and we just have our budget meeting at that time, because we have other certain steps and timelines we have to follow. So we work together with our team of 10, the 9 board members and our superintendent, and we get her done.
Appreciate it. Any other comments or discussion? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Morbid.
Second, push check.
Thanks. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. Motion carries. We are adjourned.